The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and cold air. Ursula Woods had been in labor for 11 hours. No husband beside her, no hand to hold, just a nurse who kept saying, "You're doing great," in that careful, practiced voice people use when they know something is wrong but aren't paid enough to say it. Devon had not come. She had called twice. He had not answered. Her daughter arrived at 2:47 in the morning, small, furious, perfect. The nurse placed her on Ursula's chest, and Ursula held her without crying. She had already decided somewhere around hour 6 that she would not cry again. Not for him. Not ever. She looked down at her daughter's face and made a decision she had been postponing for 5 years. If you believe every woman deserves to be seen for who she truly is, not what someone else decided she was worth, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. The morning after his daughter was born, Devon Woods woke up in a hotel suite on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand, with Sienna Price's arm draped across his chest, and the city spread out below him like something he owned. He did not check his phone for missed calls from the hospital. He ordered room service instead. Eggs. Benedict fresh-squeezed orange juice, a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Sienna stretched beside him like a cat in a sunbeam, and Devon watched her and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has arranged his life exactly as it should be. "You look pleased with yourself," Sienna said. "I am," Devon said. He had every reason to be. Devon Woods Construction Group had just closed the preliminary terms on a $30 million expansion contract, 3 new commercial developments across the city's east corridor. 5 years of grinding of managing creditors and contractors, and city council meetings that ran 3 hours past schedule. 5 years of building something real. And now, here he was, 48 hours from signing the biggest deal his company had ever touched. He poured himself coffee and did not think about Ursula. By 10 o'clock, he was at the office, moving through the open floor with the loose confidence of a man who expects rooms to rearrange themselves around him. His CFO, Noel Baptiste, met him at the glass doors with a tablet and a look Devon had learned to read as "We need to talk privately." "How are the numbers looking?" Devon asked, not slowing down. "Strong on paper," Noel said, following him. "But I want to walk you through the debt service schedule again before we get to the signing table. Hargrove Capital's quarterly review is coming up, and Dole." Devon pushed open his office door and set his coffee on the desk. "We've been over the Hargrove numbers 4 times this month. The payments are current. The covenants are clean. Stop finding problems where there aren't any." Noel hesitated in the doorway. "Yes, sir. Close the door on your way out." Noel closed the door. Devon pulled up the expansion contract on his screen and began to read, and he did not notice the way his CFO stood outside the glass partition for a moment too long before walking back to his desk with the look of a man quietly deciding something. Claudette Woods arrived at Ursula's house at noon. She did not knock so much as she announced herself, 3 sharp raps on the door, the kind that said, "I'm not asking permission. I am informing you of my presence." Ursula had just finished feeding the baby. She was still in her hospital discharge clothes, soft gray joggers, and a loose white shirt, her short natural hair uncombed, the house carrying that particular stillness of a space that hasn't adjusted yet to a new life inside it. She opened the door. Claudette stood on the porch in a champagne gold wrap dress and pearl earrings, as though she had come from a luncheon rather than to a house where her grandchild had arrived less than 24 hours ago. She carried no gift. She carried a manila envelope. "You look tired," Claudette said. "I gave birth yesterday," Ursula said. Claudette's expression did not change. She had the face of a woman who had long ago decided that other people's pain was largely a matter of poor planning. She stepped inside without being invited, looked around the living room with the slow assessment of someone appraising property they expect to repossess, and set the envelope on the kitchen counter. "Devon asked me to bring that," she said. Ursula looked at the envelope. She did not move toward it. "What is it? What needs to be done?" Claudette said. "The marriage has run its course, Ursula. You know that. Devon knows that. The only person who seems determined to pretend otherwise is you. There's a settlement outline inside. It's fair, it's clean, and it gives you enough to get yourself situated somewhere modest." She paused. Devon's lawyer drew it up. "It's ready to sign." The baby made a small sound from the bassinet in the next room. Both women heard it. Only one of them looked toward it. Ursula turned back to Claudette. She studied the older woman's face, the composed mouth, the careful eyes, the absolute certainty of a woman who had spent 62 years being the most powerful person in every room she entered. Ursula had spent 5 years watching Claudette operate. She knew exactly how she worked, pressure dressed as reason. cruelty dressed as practicality. "Thank you for bringing it over," Ursula said. Claudette blinked. She had expected tears or argument or the particular desperate energy of a woman realizing she is being discarded. She had not expected that voice quiet, even almost pleasant. "You'll review it then?" Claudette said. "I'll review it," Ursula said. Claudette nodded once, retrieved her handbag from the counter, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "A woman who can't keep her husband's attention," she said, her voice dropping to something that was almost gentle, almost kind, "has no one to blame but herself. I've always believed that." She let the words settle. "I hope you land softly, Ursula. I genuinely do." She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Door clicked shut. Ursula stood in the kitchen for a long moment. The house was quiet again. From the bassinet, her daughter made that small sound once more, not crying, just existing, just announcing herself to the world in the only language she currently had. Ursula walked to the counter. She picked up the envelope. She opened it carefully, the way she opened everything, without hurry, without any of the shaking hands the moment might have warranted, and she read every page. She read the settlement figures. She read the custody language. She read the clause about the marital home and the clause about Devon's business assets being entirely excluded from consideration. She read it all. Then she folded the papers neatly twice and set them on the kitchen table beside her daughter's bottle. She stood there with her hand resting flat on the folded document, and something in her face shifted. Not grief, not anger, something older and quieter than both. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to a contact she had not called in 4 months. The name on the screen read simply, Patricia. It rang twice. "Ursula." Her aunt's voice was warm and careful in the way of someone who has been waiting for a call, without allowing themselves to admit they were waiting. "How are you? How is the baby?" "She's perfect," Ursula said. "She looks like grandfather." A beat of silence. Then Patricia said softly, "Elias would have loved that." "Patricia?" Ursula's voice was steady. "I need to talk to you about Hargrove Capital. Not as family. As my attorney." Another silence, longer this time, waited differently. "I'll clear my afternoon," Patricia said. Ursula nodded even though no one could see her. She looked across the kitchen at the folded papers on the table, Devon's careful lawyer-constructed dismissal of 5 years of her life, and she felt for the first time since the hospital corridor something that was not quite pain and not quite calm. It was clarity. Ursula folded the divorce papers, neatly set them on the kitchen table beside her daughter's bottle, and picked up her phone to call Patricia. If this story is hitting different, if you're feeling every single word, you already know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Ursula's story is just beginning. And the best part, Devon has absolutely no idea what's coming. Patricia Hargrove Sims had an office on the 23rd floor of a building that smelled like mahogany and old money and the particular kind of quiet that only exists when everyone around you is being very careful not to waste your time. She had cleared her afternoon the way she cleared most things, efficiently, without explanation, with a single message to her assistant that said, "Hold everything," and meant exactly that. When Ursula arrived, Patricia was standing at the window with her reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked locks, looking out at the city the way people look at things they have spent decades learning to understand. She turned when she heard the door. She looked at her niece. The hospital pallor still faint beneath her rich ebony skin, the baby strapped carefully to her chest in a soft cream carrier, the quiet in her eyes that Patricia recognized because she had seen it once before 20 years ago in a room very much like this one in the face of Ursula's grandfather. "Sit down," Patricia said, and her voice was gentle, but her eyes were already working. Ursula sat. The baby slept against her chest, small fists curled entirely undisturbed by the weight of what was about to be discussed. "Tell me where you are," Patricia said. "He sent his mother with divorce papers," Ursula said. "Yesterday, while I was still in discharge clothes from the hospital." Patricia said nothing. Her jaw tightened by approximately 1 millimeter, which for Patricia Hargrove Sims was the equivalent of another person overturning a table. "The settlement excludes all business assets," Ursula continued. "The custody language gives him liberal visitation with no child support obligation, attached to his income just a flat figure that hasn't been adjusted for inflation since the draft was written, which tells me the lawyer wrote it 6 months ago, and Devon has been planning this for at least that long." She paused. "He didn't come to the hospital, Patricia." "I know," Patricia said quietly. "She was born at 2:47 in the morning, and he did not come." "I know." The room held that for a moment. Outside, the city moved the way cities move, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the private architecture of grief being assembled 23 floors above it. Then Ursula straightened in her chair and her voice changed. Not louder, not harder. Simply more precise, the way a lens changes when it finds its focus. "I want to talk about Hargrove Capital," she said. Patricia moved to her desk. She opened a drawer and removed a file she had kept separate from the rest of her caseload for 5 years, not hidden exactly, but set apart the way you set apart something you are not ready to use but are not willing to lose. She laid it open on the desk between them. "Current position," she said, settling into her chair and putting her glasses back on. "Hargrove Capital holds $47.3 million in outstanding debt instruments against Devon Woods Construction Group. That represents 78% of the company's total debt load. The loans were originated through a blind trust before your marriage. Devon's finance team negotiated with our fund managers for 2 years and never once connected the name Hargrove to you. Why would they? You were Ursula Hargrove before the wedding. You became Ursula Woods the day you signed the marriage certificate, and you never told him." "I never told him," Ursula confirmed. Patricia looked at her over the top of her glasses. "Why not? After the first year, after you knew the company was borrowing from us, why didn't you tell him?" Ursula was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the baby sleeping against her chest. When she looked up, her expression was not embarrassed, not regretful, just honest in the way that only comes after you have stopped trying to protect a story that no longer serves you. "Because I wanted to know if he loved me," she said. "Without the money, without the name. I had spent my whole life being Elias Hargrove's granddaughter. I wanted just once to be loved as nothing. As just a woman." A beat. "I got my answer." Patricia held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once the way she nodded when she had heard enough to form a complete picture, and she turned back to the file. "All right," she said. "Then let's talk about what you can do." She walked Ursula through the structure with the methodical clarity of someone who has spent 30 years turning complicated things into sentences ordinary people can act on. The prenuptial agreement which Devon had signed without reading past page 4 contained a full exclusion clause for any assets held under the Hargrove family trust prior to the marriage. That meant Hargrove Capital, its debt instruments, its equity positions, and every dollar of income generated from those instruments in the 5 years since the wedding belonged entirely and irrevocably to Ursula. Devon's lawyers could argue until the building fell down. The document was clean. Elias Hargrove had made sure of that. "Your grandfather wrote that prenup himself," Patricia said, "with 3 separate attorneys reviewing it. He told me the day you got engaged, he said, 'Patricia, I don't know this man, but I know money and I know what happens to women when the money disappears and the man doesn't.' He wanted you protected even if you didn't think you needed protecting yet." Ursula's throat moved. She said nothing. "Beyond the prenup," Patricia continued, "there is the matter of the debt instruments themselves. Hargrove Capital has standard acceleration clauses built into every loan agreement with Devon Woods Construction. Clause 14, be specifically triggered by evidence of financial fraud, unauthorized asset transfer, or material misrepresentation to the lender." She paused. "If we can demonstrate any of those conditions exist, we can demand full repayment of the $47 million within 60 days. "Can we demonstrate them?" Ursula asked. "Not yet," Patricia said. "But I have reason to believe Devon is preparing to move assets ahead of the divorce proceedings. If he does, and the way that settlement offer is structured, he almost certainly will, then 14b writes itself." Ursula absorbed this. The baby shifted slightly against her chest, and she placed one hand over the small warm back, automatically steadying without thinking. "Patricia," she said, "if I activate Hargrove Capital's position formally directly under my own name, there's no version of this where Devon doesn't find out who I am." "No," Patricia agreed. "There isn't. And the company likely survives only if I allow it to. If I call the debt, Devon Woods Construction is insolvent in 90 days. "Correct. And if I don't call the debt, I still control 78% of his financing, and every expansion plan he makes from this point forward requires my fund's approval." "Also correct." Ursula was quiet for a long time. The city hummed its indifferent hum outside the tall windows. Patricia waited. She was very good at waiting, and watched her niece's face move through something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and settled finally into something clear and cold and absolutely decided. It was the same expression Patricia thought that Elias Hargrove had worn the day he walked into a room of men who had told him his business would never survive, and laid his documentation on the table without a word and waited for them to read it. The resemblance was exact. "I know," Ursula said at last, and her voice was as steady as foundation stone. "I've been waiting 5 years to be ready. I'm ready now." Patricia closed the file. She smiled small private, the smile of someone watching a door open that has been shut for a very long time. Then let's begin, she said. Every woman carries something they don't know about yet. If Ursula's story is speaking to something in you, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, what Ursula is about to do with 5 years of patience, you are going to want a front row seat. There is a particular kind of silence that is not emptiness. It is the silence of someone who has stopped explaining themselves, who has stopped reaching, who has looked at the full shape of a situation, all its edges, all its weight, and decided that words are no longer the right tool for what needs to be done. Ursula entered that silence in the 3rd week of October, and she did not come out of it for 4 months. From the outside, her life looked like a woman recovering. She stayed home. She fed her daughter. She took slow walks around the neighborhood in the early mornings when the air was still cool and the streets were empty enough that she could think without interruption. She answered messages in brief, polite sentences. She declined 3 lunch invitations from women she had once called friends, women who called her with that careful warmth people extend to the recently humiliated, that particular generosity that is also always a little bit about proximity to drama. She declined graciously. She kept her own counsel. She gave nothing away, and at night after the baby slept, she worked. Devon in those same months was very busy being visible. He and Sienna attended the Harrington Foundation Gala in November, she in a bold red gown that photographed beautifully, he in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, both of them moving through the room with the practiced ease of people who have decided that confidence is indistinguishable from entitlement if you hold it correctly. Someone posted photographs. They were widely circulated. Several people sent them to Ursula. She did not respond to any of those messages either. In December, Claudette hosted what she described to her social circle as a family gathering, but what was in the specific and deliberate architecture of its guest list, a celebration of the divorce that had not yet been finalized. Devon's aunts were there, his business associates, 2 city council members whose goodwill Devon had cultivated carefully over several years. There was champagne. There were remarks made about new chapters and returning to one's best self that everyone in the room understood were not about Devon. Claudette sent Ursula a photograph of the flowers on the table. No message, just the photograph. Ursula looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. Then she set her phone face down and went back to the documents open on her laptop. What those documents contained was not the work of grief or impulse. It was the work of precision. The first thing Ursula did in those early quiet weeks while Devon was signing autographs at galas and Claudette was arranging flowers for parties was contact the trust administrator at Hargrove Capital and begin the process of transferring controlling interest from the family trust structure into her own name directly. It was not a dramatic move. It generated no headlines, no legal challenges, no ripple in any room that Devon occupied. It was paperwork. Patient, meticulous, entirely unglamorous paperwork that took 6 weeks to complete and permanently restructured who held the pen at Hargrove Capital. That pen was now Ursula's. The second thing she did was hire an independent forensic accounting firm, a small, exceptionally discreet operation based 3 states away, with no existing relationship to anyone in Devon's professional circle. She commissioned a full audit of Devon Woods Construction Group's financial records for the preceding 3 years. She paid for it out of a personal account Devon had never known existed attached to a name he had never thought to look for. She told them she was a concerned creditor conducting due diligence. She was not lying. The auditors worked quietly through November and into December. Ursula received their preliminary reports in installments, dense documents full of footnoted figures that she read at the kitchen table after midnight. The baby monitor on the counter beside her coffee. The house so still she could hear the heat moving through the vents. What they found in the first 2 reports was largely what she expected. Devon's company was profitable on paper, but structurally fragile too. Leveraged, too dependent on the continued goodwill of its primary creditor, operating with the specific confidence of a man who has never genuinely believed his financing could be withdrawn because no one had ever made it real for him. The 3rd report was different. The 3rd report arrived on a Wednesday morning in early January, flagged urgent by the lead auditor with a note that read simply, "We found an irregularity you need to see before we proceed." Ursula read it during the baby's morning nap. She read it twice. Then she sat very still at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the pages and looked at nothing in particular for a long moment. Then she called Patricia. "There's movement in the contractor payments from Q3 last year," she said without preamble. "Vendor accounts that don't correspond to any contracted supplier in the project records. The amounts are staggered, none of them large enough individually to trigger automatic review, but cumulatively, They represent about $890,000 over 7 months. A pause on Patricia's end. Shell accounts? The auditors think so. They're still tracing, but the pattern is consistent with someone routing money through fictitious vendor relationships. She paused. It started 8 months ago, 2 months before Devon began pulling away from me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had that particular quality it got when she was already 3 steps ahead and choosing which one to show first. He was building a cushion, she said, before the divorce. Moving money somewhere it wouldn't be visible when the asset disclosure comes. That's what the auditors believe. Ursula. Patricia's voice was careful now. If this holds up under full examination, it isn't just a divorce strategy. It's fraud against his creditors. It's fraud against Hargrove Capital. I know, Ursula said, that triggers 14B. I know. Another silence, longer this time. Then Patricia said, how do you want to proceed? Ursula looked across the kitchen. Through the window, the January morning was pale and cold. The trees bare the neighborhood emptied out by a winter that had arrived without ceremony and settled in without apology. Somewhere down the street, someone was warming up a car, the ordinary sounds of ordinary life moving forward indifferent to the extraordinary quiet inside this particular house. She thought about Devon at the gala in November. She thought about Claudette's photograph of the flowers. She thought about a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and cold air, and a nurse saying you're doing great in that practiced voice and the specific weight of a phone that does not ring when you need it to. She thought about her daughter's face. Finish the audit, she said. All of it. I want every figure confirmed and every document certified before we move. When we walk into that room, Patricia, I don't want a case. I want a conclusion. Understood, Patricia said. And Patricia. Ursula's voice was quiet, but it had that quality, the one Patricia had first heard in this exact register, in Elias Hargrove's voice 30 years ago, in a room full of men who were about to discover they had made a very significant mistake. Make sure the meeting request comes from Hargrove Capital, not from me, not yet. Of course, Patricia said. Devon will think he's negotiating with a fund manager. Let him think that, Ursula said. Let him walk into that room confident. She looked down at the auditor's report still open on the table. The numbers were clean and damning and utterly indifferent to Devon's confidence. The auditors found what she suspected, and then they found something worse. 4 months of silence. 4 months of patience. 4 months of building something Devon had no idea existed. If you're the kind of person who knows that real power doesn't announce itself, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Ursula isn't done yet, not even close. The final audit report arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late January. It was 214 pages long. Patricia had driven it over herself rather than sending it digitally, a decision that told Ursula everything she needed to know about what was inside before she opened the cover. Patricia did not drive things over herself unless they were the kind of documents that should not exist anywhere except in the hands of the people who needed them. They sat at Ursula's kitchen table. The baby was asleep in the next room. The afternoon light came through the window at a low winter angle, falling across the table in a long, pale rectangle that made the room feel simultaneously ordinary and significant, the way rooms sometimes do when they are about to hold something important. Patricia set the report between them and opened it to the executive summary. I'm going to walk you through the full picture, she said. All of it. I need you to hear it as a creditor first and as a woman second. Can you do that? Yes, Ursula said. Patricia put her glasses on. Devon Woods Construction Group had borrowed its first tranche from Hargrove Capital 4 years and 8 months ago, 18 months before Ursula's marriage, channeled through a blind trust structure that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly the kind of connection Devon's finance team had spent 2 years failing to make. The initial loan was $12 million secured against 3 commercial development contracts and a personal guarantee from Devon himself. Over the subsequent years, as Devon's ambitions expanded faster than his cash flow, the borrowing had grown. A second tranche. A third. A refinancing arrangement that consolidated the earlier instruments into a single long-term facility. Each negotiation conducted at arm's length, each agreement signed by Devon's CFO on behalf of the company, each document bearing the Hargrove Capital letterhead that Devon had apparently never once connected to the woman sleeping in his bed. The current outstanding balance was $47.3 million. That figure represented 78% of Devon Woods Construction's total debt load. The remaining 22%, approximately $13.8 million, was spread across 4 smaller commercial lenders, none of whom held any acceleration rights without Hargrove Capital moving first, which meant that Hargrove Capital did not merely hold Devon's debt. It held the architecture of Devon's entire financial existence. If Hargrove called, the smaller lenders would follow within weeks. The company would be insolvent before the summer. Patricia laid out these numbers in the flat, careful voice she used when she wanted the figures to do the emotional work themselves. Ursula listened without interrupting. Now, Patricia said, turning to a tabbed section near the middle of the report, the irregularities? What the forensic auditors had found once they had clearance to examine the full 3-year record was not the work of sophistication. It was the work of a man who believed he was smarter than the people watching him, which is perhaps the most dangerous kind of financial misconduct, because it tends to be brazen in ways that leave exceptional evidence. Between March and October of the prior year, Devon Woods Construction had processed payments totaling $3.2 million to 6 vendor accounts. The accounts were registered tax-compliant and entirely fictitious. 3 of them had been established within 60 days of the first payment. None of them had a verifiable business address, a registered contractor's license, or any record of performing work on any Devon Woods construction project. The payments had been staggered in amounts between $180,000 and $640,000, carefully sized to avoid the automatic review thresholds built into the company's own accounting software. The money, once traced through 2 intermediary accounts, had landed in a personal investment account registered in the name of a Delaware LLC, whose sole member on the formation documents was listed as Devon Elias Woods. He had used his middle name Elias, the same name as Ursula's grandfather. She did not say anything about that when Patricia pointed to it on the page. She simply looked at it for a moment and then looked away, and the particular expression that crossed her face in that second was not one that Patricia tried to interpret. $3.2 million moved? Patricia continued, in the 7 months before he sent me to deliver those divorce papers. She paused. He wasn't just preparing to leave you, Ursula. He was preparing to leave his creditors, too. He was going to file for divorce, let the company take the liability hit, and walk away clean with the money already moved, Ursula said. That is what the evidence suggests. And the $30 million expansion contract would have added significant new debt to the existing structure debt he would have negotiated using Hargrove Capital's continued support as implicit collateral while he had already begun extracting personal assets. Yes. Ursula was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly. The baby monitor on the counter emitted a soft crackling sound, her daughter shifting in her sleep, and then went quiet again. Clause 14b, Ursula said, triggered by financial fraud, unauthorized asset transfer, or material misrepresentation to the lender. Patricia confirmed. The $3.2 million transfer qualifies on all 3 counts. If we elect to invoke it, Hargrove Capital can issue a formal notice of acceleration, full repayment of the $47.3 million facility demanded within 60 days. She folded her hands on the table. Devon Woods Construction cannot pay $47.3 million in 60 days. They don't have it. They couldn't raise it. The company would be forced into insolvency proceedings before the notice period expired, which means Devon loses the company entirely. Yes. The expansion contract falls apart. Yes. Every employee, every contractor, every subcontractor, all of it. Yes, Patricia said, all of it. Ursula stood up from the table. She walked to the window and stood there with her arms crossed loosely, looking out at the bare winter street. Patricia waited. She was, as always, extraordinarily good at waiting. Ursula thought about the 214 pages on the table behind her. She thought about Noel Baptiste Devon's CFO, the one man in that company, who had looked uncomfortable every single time she had met him at Devon's work events, who had always had the expression of someone carrying a weight he hadn't agreed to carry. She thought about the employees whose names she didn't know, who had nothing to do with Devon's choices and everything to lose from them. She thought about her daughter, not about what Devon had done to her, about what she wanted her daughter to see when she looked at how her mother had handled it. She turned back from the window. I don't want to destroy the company, she said. Patricia looked at her carefully. You want to use the leverage without pulling the trigger? I want Devon out of it, Ursula said. I want the fraud exposed. I want the divorce settled on my terms. I want full custody language that actually reflects his income, and I want him to understand completely and publicly what he was dealing with when he decided I wasn't worth supporting. She paused. The company can survive without Devon. It might actually do better. You're thinking about Noel, Patricia said. I'm thinking about 200 employees who didn't move $3.2 million into a Delaware LLC, Ursula said. I'm thinking about the difference between justice and destruction, and I know which one my grandfather would have chosen. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, if we pursue this path, we need Devon in a room. Formally. On record. Where the reveal is public enough that he can't later claim he wasn't informed or that the process was irregular. I know, Ursula said. His company is up for a board presentation next month, the expansion contract signing. Full board attendance. His investors, his finance team, his legal counsel. Patricia tilted her head slightly. Hargrove Capital, as primary creditor, has the right to request a seat at any board meeting where major financing decisions are under discussion. Ursula looked at her. A slow understanding moved across the room between them. Schedule it, Ursula said. Devon had spent 5 years married to the one person who could end him. He just never thought to ask her last name. $47 million. 5 years of silence. One woman who knew exactly what she was holding and chose the right moment to show it. If this story is giving you chills, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to know that patience is not weakness. It is the longest game there is. And Ursula, she plays it better than anyone. Devon Woods was not a man who second-guessed himself. This was depending on the situation, either his greatest strength or the specific quality that would one day walk him directly into a room he could not get out of. He had built a construction company from a $400,000 seed loan and 11 years of relentless forward motion, and in his experience, the men who stopped to reconsider were the men who lost ground. You decided. You moved. You adjusted if you had to, but you never went backward. Which was why, on the second Tuesday of February, Devon did not hesitate when Sienna sat across from him in the private dining room of a restaurant whose name appeared on no public reservation platform and suggested that it was time to accelerate the asset protection strategy. The divorce proceedings are moving slower than your lawyer projected, she said. She had ordered sparkling water and was not touching it. She had that quality when she was focused, a stillness that Devon had once found magnetic and was only now occasionally in certain lights beginning to read as something closer to calculation. Every week the proceedings drag, there's more exposure. You need the transfers completed before the financial disclosure deadline. I know the timeline, Devon said. Do you? She held his gaze. Because the deadline is 6 weeks out, Devon, and you've moved $3.2 million of the planned $4.8 million. There's still $1.6 million sitting in accounts that will be fully visible the moment the court-ordered disclosure kicks in. Devon picked up his water glass. He set it down without drinking. I have people handling it. Your people have been handling it for 3 weeks, Sienna said. I'm telling you it needs to be done. He looked at her across the table. He had known on some level he did not examine closely that Sienna Price was not in this for him in the particular way a person is in something for another person. She was in it the way a very intelligent investor is in a position for as long as the position performed. He had accepted this because he found it in its honesty preferable to the alternative. Ursula had been in it for him, and look where that had led. I'll make the call tonight, he said. Sienna picked up her sparkling water and finally took a sip. Good, she said. Noel Baptiste had been Devon's CFO for 6 years. In that time, he had processed a great deal of paperwork that sat in the gray area between aggressive financial strategy and things that kept him awake at night. He was good at his job in the way that people are good at jobs that require them to be slightly better at not asking certain questions than their conscience would prefer. He had a mortgage. He had 2 daughters in private school. He had a wife who asked him sometimes why he looked tired, and to whom he said it's just the Q4 pressure baby, in a voice he hoped sounded more convincing than it felt. The instruction came through at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was formatted as a routine inter-account transfer, a memo line that read, contractor reconciliation adjustment, an authorization code that matched Devon's personal approval credentials, a destination account that Noel had processed payments to 3 times before. He knew the account. He knew what it was. He knew exactly what contractor reconciliation adjustment did not mean. He sat at his home desk for 23 minutes without moving. His daughters were asleep down the hall. His wife was watching something in the living room, the sound turned low. The house had that particular nighttime quality of a place that does not know what is happening in one of its rooms. Noel opened the transfer authorization. He looked at the amount. $640,000. He looked at the destination account. He looked at the memo line. Then he closed the authorization without processing it. He opened a separate window. He navigated to a secure external portal his company used for third-party financial reviews, a portal that 4 weeks ago an independent auditing firm had been granted limited access to for what Devon had described to him as a routine creditor due diligence check. Devon had mentioned it once briefly with the particular casualness people use when they want something to sound unimportant. Noel had noted it and said nothing. He had been noting things and saying nothing for 11 months. He uploaded the transfer authorization, the full document with the approval credentials, the destination account details, and the memo line to the auditor's secure portal. Then he processed a different transaction, a legitimate contractor payment long overdue that he had been holding as cover for exactly this kind of evening. He filed the confirmation. He closed his laptop. He went to the living room and sat beside his wife and watched the last 20 minutes of whatever she was watching without absorbing a single frame of it. He had not decided what happened next. He had simply decided that he was no longer willing to be the only person in that building who knew what he knew. Patricia received the upload at 11:03 p.m. She was still in her office. She kept hours that her junior associates found alarming and that she found simply necessary when the notification came through from the auditing firm's portal. She read the document once quickly, then she read it again slowly. Then she picked up her phone and called Ursula. "He moved again tonight," she said without preamble. "Different account structure than the previous transfers. New destination, same fictitious vendor classification, $640,000. That brings the total to $3.84 million, Ursula said. She had been awake. She was always awake when things were moving. Yes, but that's not the significant part. Patricia paused. The upload came through the auditor's portal. Someone inside Devon's organization sent it to us directly. Someone with authorization access to the transfer documents. A silence on Ursula's end. "Noel," Ursula said. "Almost certainly. I don't have confirmation yet. The upload was anonymized through the portal's standard creditor review function. But there's only one person at Devon Woods Construction with both the access level and the apparent inclination." Patricia's voice carried something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same neighborhood. "You were right about him." Ursula said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about a man she had met perhaps a dozen times over 5 years at company events, at the occasional dinner Devon hosted for his senior staff. She remembered him as someone who laughed too carefully, who answered questions about the company's finances with a precision that seemed to cost him something, who had at one particular dinner 18 months ago looked at Devon with an expression Ursula had filed away without quite knowing why. She knew why now. "Patricia," she said, "Clause 14b. "I've already drafted the notice," Patricia said. "I've been drafting it for 3 weeks. I just needed one more transfer to make the pattern unambiguous. We have it." A pause. "Shall I send it?" Ursula thought about the board meeting. 6 weeks away. The expansion contract signing? The full board, Devon's investors, his legal counsel, everyone who had built their confidence around Devon's confidence. "Send it," she said. But Patricia timed the delivery for Monday morning. "First thing, let him have the weekend." "You're giving him the weekend?" "I'm giving him the last weekend he'll spend believing he has control of this situation," Ursula said. "After Monday, he won't have that anymore. I don't need to take it from him on a Tuesday night. He can have until Monday." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather used to say that the most powerful thing a person can do in a negotiation is control the timing." "I know," Ursula said. "He told me." The letter from Hargrove Capital arrived at Devon Woods Construction at 9:03 a.m. on a Monday. Devon was already at his desk, already 3 calls into his morning, already running on the particular high-frequency energy of a man who believes the week ahead holds nothing but opportunity. His assistant brought the envelope in with the morning correspondence. He opened it last, the way he opened things he expected to be routine. He read it once. Then he read it again. His hands by the third reading had started shaking. The letter from Hargrove Capital arrived at Devon Woods Construction at 9:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Devon read it 3 times before his hands started shaking. He thought he was the one making moves. He had no idea who was watching every single one of them. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it right now. The board meeting is coming, and Devon is about to walk into a room he will never forget. Don't miss it. Devon read the letter 4 more times before he called his lawyer. Not because he did not understand it, he understood it perfectly, which was precisely the problem. The language was clean and formal and entirely without ambiguity, the kind of legal prose that has been written by someone who wanted to make absolutely certain that no one receiving it could later claim they had been confused about what it meant. Hargrove Capital was invoking Clause 14B of the Master Loan Agreement. Full repayment of the outstanding facility $47,312,000 plus accrued interest and applicable fees was required within 60 days. The basis for acceleration evidence of unauthorized asset transfer and material misrepresentation to the lender documented and attached as Exhibit A through Exhibit F. Exhibit A through Exhibit F was 41 pages long. Devon's lawyer, Marcus Teal, arrived at the office within the hour. He read the letter. He read the exhibits. He set the documents down on Devon's desk with the particular careful deliberateness of a man who is buying himself time to compose his expression before he speaks. "This is serious," Marcus said. "I can see that it's serious," Devon said. "Tell me something I need." "I need to know how much of Exhibit A through F is accurate." Devon said nothing. Marcus looked at him over the documents. He had been Devon's attorney for 9 years. He knew Devon's silences the way a translator knows a second language, not just the words, but the specific weight of what wasn't being said. "Devon." "Some of it," Devon said. "Not all of it." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "How much is some?" Devon pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. Below him, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. All those ordinary lives running on ordinary schedules, none of them aware that 14 floors up, a man was standing at a window watching $47 million become the most immediate problem he had ever had. "Enough," Devon said, "that I need this to go away quietly." "It won't go away quietly," Marcus said. "A 14B acceleration from a creditor holding 78% of your debt load does not go away quietly. The question is whether it goes away at all." He paused. "Do you know anything about who runs Hargrove Capital personally? I mean, not just the fund managers you've been dealing with." Devon turned from the window. "It's a family trust, old money. Nobody I've ever met." "Nobody you've ever met?" Marcus repeated. He looked at the letterhead on the notice. Hargrove Capital, Patricia Hargrove Sims, General Counsel. "I'll reach out to their legal team and request a meeting. We can argue the evidentiary basis for the 14B trigger challenge, whether the asset transfers genuinely constitute fraud under the agreement's definitions. It will buy time." "How much time?" 30 days, maybe, if they're willing to negotiate." Devon turned back to the window. 30 days? He turned the number over in his mind the way you turn an object in your hands when you're trying to understand its dimensions. The expansion contract signing was in 5 weeks. If the signing went ahead, if he could get through the board meeting with the investors intact, close the $30 million contract, use the incoming revenue projections to demonstrate solvency, there was a version of this where the company survived. It would be tight, it would be ugly, but it could work. "Set up the meeting," Devon said, "as soon as they'll take it." He called Sienna from his car on the way to a site visit that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, and Devon told her about the letter in the precise, controlled voice he used when he needed to think out loud without revealing how badly something had rattled him. He heard her go very still on the other end of the line, in that way she had that quality of attention that felt, depending on the day, like either focus or calculation. $47 million in 60 days, she said. "Yes, Devon." A pause. "Can the company pay that? Will you? Not in 60 days, not without the expansion contract revenue." "So if the expansion falls apart?" "The expansion is not falling apart," Devon said. "The board meeting is in 5 weeks. The contract signs at that meeting. I just need to get through the next 30 days without Hargrove calling anything else in." Sienna was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a quality Devon did not examine too closely. "What about the transfers? The money in the Delaware account?" "That's protected," Devon said. "It's structured separately. Whatever happens with the company, that account is clean." Another silence, shorter this time. "Okay," Sienna said, "and keep me informed." She ended the call before he did. Devon held the phone in his hand for a moment after the line went dead, and there was a thought at the edge of his mind that he did not allow to fully form a thought about the particular speed with which Sienna had moved from "is the company solvent" to "what about the personal money," and he pushed it back and kept driving. Claudette called him that evening. She had heard not from Devon, but through the specific social architecture of a woman who had spent 62 years cultivating the right informational networks, that something was wrong at the company. She did not ask directly. She never asked directly. She asked instead about the board meeting, about the expansion contract, about whether Devon had spoken to his Uncle Raymond, who had contacts at 2 of the smaller commercial lenders. "I'm handling it," Devon said. "You're handling it," Claudette repeated in the tone she used when she was filing information, rather than responding to it. And Hargrove Capital, are you handling that too? Devon paused. How do you know about Hargrove? I know about everything that affects my son's company, Claudette said. That's not arrogance, Devon. That's attention. A beat. Who are they, the Hargrove people? What do you know about them? A family trust. Old money. Their general counsel is named Patricia Hargrove Sims. I've never met anyone from that family personally. The silence on Claudette's end lasted just slightly longer than a normal pause. Devon noticed it. What? He said. Nothing, Claudette said. I was just thinking. Her voice had shifted by some small but perceptible degree, not alarmed but recalibrated the way a very careful person sounds when they are connecting something they are not yet ready to say out loud. Handle the meeting, Devon, and let me know what they say. She hung up. Devon sat with his phone in his hand again and thought about the particular quality of that pause, and then decided, as he decided most things that made him uncomfortable, that it was nothing. The meeting with Hargrove Capital's legal team was scheduled for the following Thursday. Devon's assistant confirmed it, sent the calendar invite, noted the address, a building on the 23rd floor of a midtown tower Devon had driven past 100 times without ever entering. Devon reviewed his talking points that night at his desk, the same desk where he had opened the acceleration notice 9 days earlier, building the argument in his mind with the methodical confidence of a man who has always been able to talk his way through a room. He needed to demonstrate goodwill. Acknowledge the technical breach while challenging the fraud classification. Propose a structured repayment schedule tied to the expansion contract revenue. Come in as a serious operator who had made an administrative error, not as a man who had spent 7 months moving money into a Delaware LLC under a fictitious vendor structure. He practiced the language. He felt by the end of the evening reasonably prepared. He did not call Ursula. He had not called Ursula in 11 weeks, not since the day he had called, to ask her with a casualness that had cost him considerable effort to manufacture whether she might be willing to contribute to a bridge loan for the company. She had let the phone ring for a long time before answering. She had listened to him explain without interrupting. Then she had said in a voice so quiet he had pressed the phone harder against his ear to make sure he was hearing it correctly. No, Devon, I don't think that's something I can help you with. And she had ended the call. He had been irritated by it for 2 days and then filed it away in the category of things that were her loss. He thought about that phone call now briefly and then moved on. He needed to meet with whoever ran Hargrove Capital. His assistant made the appointment. Neither of them knew they were scheduling a meeting with his wife. Devon spent 9 years building a company and 5 years married to the woman who held the key to all of it, and he never once thought to look. Subscribe to this channel, ring that notification bell, and share this story. The meeting is in 1 week, and everything Devon thinks he knows about the person sitting across that table is wrong. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. Devon arrived at 9:40, which was his habit, early enough to own the room before anyone else entered it, late enough not to appear anxious. He wore the charcoal suit he reserved for moments that required authority. He had slept adequately. He had reviewed his talking points one final time over coffee at 6:30. He had, in the 9 days since the Hargrove acceleration notice arrived, constructed a version of this morning that he could move through with confidence, and he intended to move through it exactly that way. The boardroom on the 31st floor of Devon Woods Construction's headquarters building had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. The city filled those windows like a painting of itself, big and luminous and permanent, in the way cities look when you are standing above them at a significant height. Devon had chosen this office, this floor, these windows specifically because of what they communicated. He had wanted every person who sat in this room to look out at that city and understand without being told that the man who brought them here was serious about scale. He stood at the window for a moment before the others arrived and looked out at it, and he felt, despite the acceleration notice, despite the 60-day clock, despite 11 weeks of a divorce proceeding that had moved with the agonizing slowness of something being very carefully assembled, the particular steadiness that comes from being in a room you have always controlled. He turned when the door opened. His investors arrived first. 3 of them men Devon had cultivated over years of careful relationship management, men who believed in Devon Woods Construction because Devon had made believing in it consistently profitable. They shook hands, took their seats, made the small talk of people who are comfortable with each other and with the business about to be conducted. Then his finance team. Noel Baptiste entered without making eye contact with Devon, which Devon noted and filed away for later. The company's internal legal counsel. 2 project directors whose presence at the board meeting was primarily ceremonial witnesses to assigning validators of a milestone. Marcus Teal arrived at 9:58 and took the seat beside Devon, with the expression of a man who had been managing bad news for 3 weeks and was deeply tired of it. At 10 o'clock exactly, the door opened again. Patricia Hargrove Sims walked in first. Devon knew her face from the legal correspondence she had signed every document Hargrove Capital had sent in the preceding 3 weeks, but seeing her in person was different. She was tall, angular, carrying that specific quality of authority that does not announce itself because it does not need to. She wore a charcoal power suit. Her silver-streaked locks were pulled back. Her reading glasses were perched on her nose, and she was already scanning the room with the unhurried thoroughness of someone taking inventory. She was followed by 2 members of her legal team, and then behind them a woman in a white tailored blazer walked through the door, and Devon Woods looked up from his chair, and the careful architecture of his prepared morning collapsed completely. Ursula did not rush. She walked the length of the boardroom at the pace of someone who has been in this room, or rooms exactly like it many times before. She wore a sharp white pantsuit, her short, natural TWA immaculate, her rich, ebony skin catching the light from the city windows in a way that made her look, Devon thought, with a distant and useless clarity, like someone who had been waiting a long time for adequate lighting. She carried a leather portfolio. She set it on the table. She did not look at Devon until she sat down, and when she did, her expression was the one he had last seen in a hospital corridor, the one that had unsettled him then, and unsettled him considerably more now. Not anger, not triumph. Just the absolute steadiness of a person who knows exactly where they are and exactly why they came. Devon stood up. The room went very still. "What are you doing here?" he said. It came out flat, stripped of punctuation by the sheer involuntary force of the question. Ursula opened her portfolio. She did not look up immediately. She found the page she wanted, smoothed it with one hand, and then looked at her husband across the boardroom table with the same expression his grandfather would have recognized. "Sitting where I've always belonged, Devon," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely clear. "At the head of Hargrove Capital." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Devon's investors looked at each other. Devon's internal counsel looked at Marcus Teal. Marcus Teal looked at his own hands on the table. Noel Baptiste, at the far end of the room, looked at Ursula with an expression that was not surprise, that was in fact the expression of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been relieved of it. Claudette was not in the room. She had not been invited. But Devon thought about the pause on the phone, the careful recalibration of her voice when he had said the name Patricia Hargrove Sims, and understood with a completeness that arrived all at once like cold water that his mother had known, or suspected, or gotten close enough to the edge of knowing that she had not slept well in 2 weeks, and she had not told him. He did not have time to process what that meant. "Ursula!" His voice came out lower than he intended. "You need to tell me what this is." "It's a board meeting," she said pleasantly. "You scheduled it. I accepted the invitation." She turned a page in her portfolio. Hargrove Capital, as primary creditor holding 78% of Devon Woods Construction's outstanding debt, has a standing right to representation at any board meeting where major financing decisions are under consideration. You're signing a $30 million expansion contract today. That qualifies. He stopped, started again. "You're Hargrove Capital." "I am the controlling interest of Hargrove Capital," Ursula said. "I have been since my grandfather Elias Hargrove passed the trust to me 7 years ago, before we were married, Devon, before your company borrowed its first dollar from us." She paused, and her voice did not change in temperature or volume by any measurable degree. "You spent 2 years negotiating with my fund managers and never once asked who owned the fund. That's not my oversight. That's yours." Devon sat back down. He was not aware of deciding to sit. His legs made the decision independently. Across the table, one of his investors, a man named Gerald Foster, who had put $4 million into Devon Woods Construction 18 months ago, said very quietly, "Devon, is this true?" Devon did not answer. Patricia laid a document on the table and slid it smoothly to the center. "For the record," she said, "Hargrove Capital's acceleration notice under Clause 14B remains active. Full repayment of $47.3 million is required within 49 days from today's date." She folded her hands. "However, Ms. Hargrove Woods has authorized me to present an alternative resolution, one that does not require immediate repayment, and does not result in insolvency proceedings contingent on certain conditions being met in full." Gerald Foster looked at the document. Then he looked at Devon. Then he looked at Ursula. "I'd like to hear the conditions," Gerald said. Devon looked at him. Gerald was not looking back. Devon looked at his internal counsel. His internal counsel was reading the document Patricia had placed on the table. Devon looked at Marcus Teal. Marcus Teal said very quietly for Devon's ears only, "Don't speak. Not yet. Let her talk." Ursula turned another page in her portfolio. Outside the windows, the city continued its indifferent, magnificent motion. All those ordinary lives running on ordinary schedules, none of them aware that 31 floors up in a room full of city light and perfect silence, a woman who had been underestimated for 5 consecutive years was finally sitting at the table she had always been entitled to sit at. Somewhere outside the boardroom down the corridor, Patricia's junior associate sat in the waiting area with a baby on her lap, small, alert, looking around at the world with the wide, curious gaze of someone encountering everything for the first time. The baby made a small sound. The room went silent. Somewhere outside, a baby made a small sound, and Ursula didn't look away from her husband's face. 5 years, $47 million, 1 white blazer, and a woman who never once raised her voice. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video right now, because what happens next in that boardroom is something Devon Woods will spend the rest of his life thinking about. Don't miss Fan Chin. Patricia opened the presentation with the particular efficiency of someone who has no interest in theater and every interest in precision. She did not begin with the acceleration notice. She began with the debt structure, a clean single-page summary that laid out, in numbers that required no interpretation, exactly what Devon Woods Construction owed to whom, and what the consequences of non-payment looked like across a 60-day horizon. She walked the room through it in 4 minutes. By the time she finished, Gerald Foster had his reading glasses on, and his pen uncapped, and Devon's 2 other investors were leaning forward in the specific posture of men recalculating their positions in real time. Devon sat at the head of the table and said nothing. He had the look of a man who has walked into a building he believed he knew the layout of and discovered mid-stride that the floor plan had been changed. Not panic. Devon was not at his core a man given to visible panic, but a profound and total stillness, the kind that comes when the mind is moving very fast behind a face that has locked down completely. Ursula watched him from across the table. She did not watch him with satisfaction exactly. She watched him the way you watch something you have been anticipating for a long time, with the strange flatness that arrives when reality finally catches up to the version you have carried in your head. She had imagined this room many times in the preceding months. She had imagined it differently each time, sometimes angrier, sometimes colder. Once, in a late-night moment of exhaustion, she did not revisit with tears she had not allowed in the waking hours. The actual room was quieter than any version she had imagined. More ordinary. The city still moved outside the windows. The overhead lights hummed their neutral hum. Devon's CFO sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded and his eyes down, and Ursula felt looking at him a specific and uncomplicated gratitude. When Patricia finished the debt summary, she nodded once at Ursula. Ursula placed both hands flat on the table and looked at the room. "Hargrove Capital is not here to destroy this company," she said. She let that land for a moment before continuing, not for dramatic effect, but because she needed the room to hear it cleanly without the noise of what came after crowding what came before. "I want to be direct about that. The $47.3 million facility can be restructured rather than accelerated if the conditions I'm about to outline are met in full. Every person in this room who has invested in Devon Woods Construction, in good faith, deserves to know that the company's survival is not the question being resolved today. The question being resolved today is a different one." Gerald Foster set his pen down. "What question is that?" "Who runs it?" Ursula said. The room was very quiet. She opened her portfolio to the tabbed section Patricia had prepared and slid 3 copies of the document to the center of the table, one toward Marcus Teal, one toward Devon's internal counsel, one toward Gerald Foster, who had in the preceding 10 minutes organically become the investor's de facto spokesman. "The conditions are as follows," she said. "First, the divorce settlement. Devon signs the existing prenuptial agreement's asset division terms in full today before this meeting concludes. No modifications, no counterproposals, no extensions. The prenup is 9 years old and was reviewed by 3 independent attorneys before either of us signed it. The terms are not ambiguous." Devon's jaw tightened by a degree. Ursula continued. "Second, child support. The figure in Devon's proposed settlement was calculated against a projected income number that has not been accurate for 4 years. The correct figure, based on Devon's verified income across the preceding 3 fiscal years, is attached as Schedule C. Devon agrees to that figure, indexed to inflation, payable monthly, with a 60-day grace period on the first payment only. Third, Devon Woods Construction Group's board of directors will be restructured within 30 days. Devon will resign from the board and from the position of CEO effective at the end of the current fiscal quarter. The company will not be dissolved. It will continue operations under new executive leadership, to be determined by the remaining board members and the investors in this room. She paused. I have a recommendation if the board would like to hear it. Gerald Foster said without hesitation, We'd like to hear it. Ursula looked briefly at the far end of the table. Noel Baptiste looked up. Noel Baptiste has served as CFO of this company for 6 years, Ursula said. He knows every line of the financials, every creditor relationship, every project contract. He also has the specific quality that this company requires most urgently at this moment. She paused. He is honest. Under his leadership and with Hargrove Capital's continued financing on restructured terms, Devon Woods Construction can complete the East Corridor expansion and return to stable ground within 18 months. She closed her portfolio. That is my recommendation. Noel looked at the table. His throat moved. He did not speak. Gerald Foster looked at Devon. For a long moment he simply looked at him, not unkindly, but with the absolute clarity of a man who has just fully understood the shape of a situation he was previously seeing from the wrong angle. Then he looked back at Ursula. The investors will need 30 minutes, he said. Of course, Ursula said. Devon spoke for the first time since Ursula had sat down. I'd like a moment, he said, with my wife. The word came out wrong, too familiar, or too late, or both. Ursula noticed it. So did everyone else in the room. Patricia looked at Ursula. Ursula gave a small nod. The room cleared efficiently. Lawyers, investors, project directors, they filed out with the practiced discretion of people who have learned when a room needs to be private. The door closed. Devon and Ursula sat across from each other at a table designed to hold 20 people, which made the distance between them feel both exact and enormous. Devon looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man assembling words, trying different arrangements of them, finding each one inadequate, setting it aside, and trying another. How long, he said finally, how long did you know that Hargrove Capital held your debt? Since the 2nd year of our marriage, Ursula said. I found the loan documentation in a file you left at the house. You didn't know what you were looking at. I did. Devon absorbed this, and you said nothing. I said nothing. For 3 years. For 3 years, Ursula confirmed. I kept hoping you would become someone who deserved to be told. She said it without cruelty, just as a fact clean and final as a figure at the bottom of a ledger. You didn't. Devon looked at his hands on the table. His charcoal suit, which had seemed like authority when he put it on this morning, seemed now like something he had borrowed from a version of himself that no longer existed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said in a voice stripped of everything except its actual register, The baby, how is she? Ursula looked at him. Something crossed her face, not softness exactly, but the particular complexity of a person who has not stopped being human simply because they have been wronged. She's perfect, Ursula said. She looks like my grandfather. Devon nodded. He did not say anything else. Ursula stood. She straightened her white blazer. She picked up her portfolio. She looked at Devon one final time, not with the rage she had been entitled to, and not with the forgiveness that had not yet arrived, but with the particular expression of a woman who has finished one thing and is beginning another. You should get your lawyer, she said. They'll be ready to come back in a few minutes. She moved to the door and opened it. Devon picked up the pen. His mother had watched him sign many things over the years, contracts, proposals, agreements, that had built the company piece by piece. She was not in the room today. She would hear about it the way she heard about most things, through the specific social architecture she had spent 62 years constructing. Devon signed the first document, then the second, then the third. The pen made its small sound against the paper. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city moved in its vast, indifferent way, enormous and luminous, and entirely unbothered by the quiet scratching of a man signing away the version of his life he had constructed on the assumption that he was the most important person in it. Devon picked up the pen. His mother watched him sign. Neither of them said a word. He signed. Every page. In a room he built in front of the people he wanted to impress with the pen he brought to close the deal of his career. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this story today. Because what Ursula builds next, that's the part that will take your breath away. 3 months after the board meeting on a Tuesday morning in late spring, Ursula Woods opened the glass doors of a new office on the 27th floor of a building she had chosen herself. Not inherited, not assigned. Chosen from 6 options Patricia had presented reviewed over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, with the baby asleep in the next room, selected on the basis of light and ceiling height, and the particular quality of quiet that a workspace has when it has been designed by someone who understood that concentration is not just a mental state, but an architectural one. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side. In the mornings, the light came in at an angle that made the whole space feel like the beginning of something. She had named the restructured fund Hargrove Woods Equity. Not Hargrove alone, which would have been the simpler choice, the one that erased the 5 years cleanly that returned her to the woman she had been before Devon's last name. And not Woods alone, which would have been its own kind of statement, the kind that announces its wounds by the care it takes to display them. Hargrove Woods. Both names. The full accounting of who she was and where she had come from and what she had carried through. Patricia had raised an eyebrow when Ursula told her. "You're keeping his name," Patricia said. "I'm keeping my daughter's name," Ursula said. "She is Elias Hargrove Woods. So am I. That doesn't change because Devon changed." Patricia had looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not agreement exactly, but was something adjacent to it, the recognition of a person seeing another person clearly and finding them on reflection exactly as they should be. The restructuring of Devon Woods construction had taken 11 weeks. It had not been clean or simple or free of the particular ugliness that attends the dismantling of something a man has spent 11 years building. There had been lawyers and counter-lawyers and a mediation session that lasted 9 hours and produced at the end a set of documents that Patricia described as thorough and Devon's attorneys described as exhausting, and that everyone involved understood were as final as anything gets. Devon had resigned from the board at the end of the fiscal quarter as agreed. Noel Baptiste had been appointed interim CEO by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members, and the investors Gerald Foster had moved the appointment himself, which Ursula had noted and appreciated without mentioning. Noel had accepted with the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight uphill for a long time and has finally been given permission to set it down and do the thing properly. In his first 6 weeks as CEO, Noel had terminated the 3 fictitious vendor relationships Devon had established, recovered $1.1 million of the transferred funds through civil proceedings that Patricia's team had filed quietly and efficiently, and renegotiated the East Corridor expansion contract's timeline to give the company 4 additional months of runway before the first major capital outlay. He had also, on his 3rd week in the role, sent Ursula a single email. It read, "I should have made a different call 11 months ago. I want you to know I understand that. Thank you for giving the company a reason to still be here." Ursula had read it twice. Then she had replied, "You made the right call when it counted. That's what matters. Now build something worth the trouble." Noel had responded with a single word, "Yes." Sienna Price had left the city in February. She had not announced her departure the way people announce departures that are chosen rather than necessitated. There was no social media post about new beginnings or fresh chapters, or the particular curated optimism of someone who has decided to rebrand a retreat as an advance. She had simply stopped appearing at the events and restaurants and social gatherings where she had been for the better part of a year, a visible presence beside Devon Woods. Devon had not spoken publicly about it. He had moved into an apartment in the west side of the city, a good apartment, not a diminished one, because the personal funds in the Delaware LLC remained his, despite the civil recovery proceedings, and Devon was not a man who voluntarily reduced his standard of living, and he had, as far as anyone in their social circle could determine, gotten very quiet. Ursula did not think about this often. When she did, she felt nothing she could cleanly categorize. Not satisfaction, not grief, not the particular vindication she had perhaps expected to feel when she had imagined this outcome in the long dark evenings of the previous October. What she felt mostly was tired, the specific tiredness of having carried something heavy for a long time and having finally set it down on solid ground. Claudette had called once. It was a Sunday afternoon in March, 6 weeks after the board meeting. Ursula had been sitting on the floor of the new apartment's living room, the baby propped against a cushion beside her, both of them looking at a picture book with the deep mutual concentration of people discovering something together for the first time. When she saw the name on her screen, she answered. There was a pause on Claudette's end, the pause of a woman who had prepared what she intended to say and was now in the actual moment of saying it, finding the prepared version insufficient. "How is she?" Claudette said finally. "The baby." "She's well," Ursula said. "She's learning to recognize faces." Another pause. "I didn't know," Claudette said. "About Hargrove Capital, about who you were. I want you to know that." Ursula considered this. She thought about the pause on the phone 11 weeks ago, when Devon had said the name Patricia Hargrove Sims, and Claudette's voice had shifted by that small but perceptible degree. She thought about what it would cost Claudette, a woman who had spent 62 years being the most informed person in every room she entered, to admit that she had been in the dark about something this significant for this long. "I believe you," Ursula said, and she did not entirely, not without reservation, but enough. Enough to say it honestly. "She deserves to know her grandmother," Claudette said. The words came out with an effort that was for Claudette the equivalent of another person going to their knees. "I know I haven't given you reasons. I'm asking anyway." Ursula looked at her daughter. The baby had reached out and grabbed the edge of the picture book with both hands and was examining it with the absolute focused intensity of someone encountering texture for the first time. She had Devon's hands broad, strong, built for holding things. She had Elias Hargrove's eyes dark and deep set, and already somehow looking at the world like someone taking careful notes. "I'm not closing that door," Ursula said, "but I'm not opening it today. When I'm ready, I'll reach out." Claudette said thank you. It was the first time in 6 years of knowing the woman that Ursula had heard her say those two words without qualification. On the morning she opened the Hargrove Woods equity offices, Patricia arrived with 2 coffees and a folder of documents for the first week's review, and stood at the east window for a moment looking out at the city the way she looked at things she had spent decades learning to understand. "Your grandfather would have been proud," she said. The same words she had said in the hospital room. Said differently now, not consolation, but confirmation. Ursula stood beside her at the window. Below them the city moved in its vast, indifferent way. Ordinary lives on ordinary schedules. Somewhere across town, Devon Woods Construction Group was opening its own offices under new management, beginning the slow, careful work of becoming something it had not quite been before. Somewhere in the west side of the city, Devon was waking up in an apartment that was good but different, beginning whatever chapter came after the one that had just ended. And here on the 27th floor of a building, chosen for its light and its quiet Hargrove Woods equity, was beginning its first official morning. Ursula thought about the 11 months it had taken to get to this room, the hospital corridor, the folded divorce papers beside the baby's bottle, the midnight audits and the quiet phone calls, and the 4 months of visible silence while the invisible work got done. She thought about a woman who had spent 5 years being underestimated and had used every one of those years to learn exactly where to stand when the moment came. She had not saved his company out of love. She had saved it because her daughter would one day inherit a world worth inheriting. 3 months. A new name on the door, 200 employees still working, and one woman who built all of it while the man who underestimated her wasn't paying attention. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. 1 part left, and the ending. It belongs entirely to Ursula. The birth certificate had taken longer than it should have. Not because of any legal complication, the paperwork itself was straightforward, the kind of administrative task that gets done in a single afternoon with the right documents in hand. It had taken longer because Ursula had not been ready. She had known the name she wanted to give her daughter from the night the baby was born, in that hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and cold air, in the moment she had looked down at the small, furious, perfect face, and understood with a completeness that arrived without ceremony that this child was not the ending of anything. She was the beginning of everything that came after. But naming her had felt in those first fragile months like a declaration she was not yet steady enough to make. A name is a thing you give into the world permanently. It attaches to a person and travels with them through every room they will ever enter, carries the weight of every intention behind it. Ursula had wanted to be certain, not just emotionally certain, the way you are certain of things you feel in the middle of the night, but the kind of certain that holds in the morning in the clear light of a life that is actually being lived. She had waited until she was ready. On a quiet Wednesday morning in April, 4 months after the board meeting, Ursula drove to the county registrar's office with the birth certificate form in her portfolio, and Patricia sitting in the passenger seat, looking out at the city with the particular expression she wore when she was trying not to show that something was affecting her. The registrar was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the efficient warmth of someone who has witnessed thousands of ordinary, extraordinary moments and not grown tired of them. She took the form. She reviewed it. She typed the name into the system with the careful deliberateness of someone who understands that what they are entering will exist in a record somewhere for the rest of a person's life. She looked up. "Beautiful name," she said. "Thank you," Ursula said. It was her great-great-grandfather's. Elias Hargrove Woods, both names, all of it. The Hargrove that had built something real and lasting and worth protecting, that had sat in rooms full of people who underestimated it and placed its documentation on the table without flinching and waited for the room to catch up. The Woods that had carried her through 5 years of a marriage that had cost her considerably more than she had allowed herself to admit, that had given her a daughter with broad, strong hands and deep, curious eyes that she was keeping not as a wound but as a record, because records matter and erasing them does not change what happened, and she had never been a woman who preferred comfortable fictions to accurate accounts. Patricia in the passenger seat on the drive back said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Elias would have been insufferable about this, you know. He would have told everyone." Ursula laughed. It came out real and unhurried, the laugh of someone who has not laughed that way in a while and is slightly surprised by the ease of it. He would have had it on his business cards, she agreed. The Hargrove Woods equity offices had settled into their rhythm by May. It was a small team, intentionally small, built with the same deliberateness Ursula brought to everything. 6 people each chosen for a specific combination of capability and integrity that Ursula had learned in 33 years of watching her grandfather and 5 years of watching her husband to treat as non-negotiable. You could train competence. You could not train the quality that made Noel Baptiste sit at his home desk at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night and decide he was not willing to be the only person in the building who knew what he knew. That quality either existed in a person or it did not. Ursula hired accordingly. The fund's first independent investment, made under her direct authority in her own name, with no blind trust interposition, was a $4.2 million equity stake in a women-owned construction firm in the city's South Corridor. A company 3 years old, run by a woman named Diana Reeves, who had built it from a single residential contract and a $60,000 loan from her mother-in-law, and who had spent 2 years being told by every traditional lender she approached that her revenue projections were ambitious. They were ambitious. They were also accurate. Ursula had read every line of Diana Reeves's financials and recognized in the particular shape of the numbers the specific signature of someone who was not guessing but knowing. She had called Diana directly. "I've reviewed your projections," she had said. "I believe them. Tell me what you'd do with $4.2 million in 18 months. Diana Reeves had been quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she had said in a voice that was steady and clear and entirely without performance, "I'd build something you'd want to tell your daughter about." Ursula had thought about that answer for the rest of the day. Then she had called Patricia and told her to draw up the term sheet. On a Friday evening in late May, Patricia came by the apartment. Not for business. She had been doing that more often lately, arriving without a folder sitting on the floor, with the baby the way people sit on the floor with babies, when the baby is at the age of requiring full human attention and finding it entirely reasonable to demand it. Elias Hargrove Woods was 4 months old and had recently discovered that if she produced a specific sound, something between a syllable and a declaration, adults within range rearranged themselves to look at her. She was, Ursula thought, going to be absolutely exhausting in the best possible way. Patricia sat on the living room floor with the baby in her lap and watched her examine a soft cloth book with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, and Patricia's face had that expression again, the one she had worn at the window of the 27th floor office at the county registrar's parking lot, at the kitchen table the night she had closed the audit file and said, "Let's begin." Not quite pride. Something older and quieter than pride. The expression of a woman watching a long story arrive at the chapter it was always building toward. "She has his eyes," Patricia said. "She has grandfather's eyes," Ursula said. "Devon just happened to have the same ones." Patricia smiled. The evening light came through the apartment windows in long, low shafts, warm and unhurried, the specific quality of late spring light that makes ordinary rooms feel like they are being seen clearly for the first time. The city hummed its perpetual hum outside. Somewhere across town, Devon Woods Construction Group was finishing its first quarter under new leadership. The numbers from what Noel had shared in his most recent update were cautiously good. Somewhere in the west side, Devon was living his quieter life. Somewhere in the South Corridor, Diana Reeves was breaking ground on a development that would not exist without a phone call made by a woman who had learned to trust her own reading of a room. Ursula sat on the floor beside her daughter and her aunt, and looked at the evening light on the walls and felt for the first time in longer than she could precisely locate the specific quality of a life that has been fully inhabited. Not easy, not without its specific costs and specific griefs and the particular weight of 5 years that could not be unlived, but inhabited fully honestly with both names on the door. Patricia looked at her. "How are you, actually?" Ursula considered the question with the same care she gave everything. She looked at her daughter, who had abandoned the cloth book in favor of examining her own hand with an expression of pure scientific inquiry. She looked at the evening light. She thought about hospital corridors and kitchen tables and boardroom windows, and the slow, patient work of building something real from the materials that remain, after the things you thought were permanent turn out not to be. "I'm good," she said. And it was true, not the reflexive good of someone deflecting, not the performed good of someone managing a presentation, but the actual substantive, quietly astonishing good of a person who has arrived after a long and circuitous route exactly where they were always supposed to be. Patricia nodded. She looked back at the baby. Your grandfather would have been proud, she said for the third time. Said differently again, not consolation, not confirmation, but simply a fact, offered the way you offer facts that are so true they don't require elaboration. Ursula looked at her daughter's face. She had spent 5 years hiding who she was. Now her daughter would grow up knowing exactly what her mother's name meant. Ursula Woods. Ursula Hargrove Woods. A woman who carried everything quietly, built everything carefully, and when the moment came, walked into that room in a white blazer and sat exactly where she belonged. Thank you for being here for every single part of the story. If it moved you, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us what part of Ursula's journey stayed with you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose kitchen table this story might reach. There is a version of this story that ends with a woman's anger, with the satisfaction of watching someone who hurt you discover publicly and completely that they underestimated you, with the particular pleasure of a reckoning delivered in a room full of witnesses in front of the people whose opinions the person who hurt you spent years cultivating. That version is understandable. It is even in its way earned. But Ursula Woods did not build what she built in order to feel that satisfaction. She built it because she looked at her daughter's face on the night she was born and understood something that cannot be taught and cannot be borrowed, and can only be arrived at through the specific experience of being fully alone with what is true. That the way you respond to betrayal is not about the person who betrayed you. It is about the person your child will one day look back at and call their mother. Ursula could have called the debt in October. She had the grounds, she had the documents. She could have walked into that process with justifiable fury and walked out with the wreckage of Devon Woods Construction as her evidence that she had not been the kind of woman you treated the way Devon had treated her. She chose differently. Not because Devon deserved her restraint. He did not. Not because Claudette deserved a grandchild's photograph on her wall. That remains to be determined. But because 200 people who had nothing to do with what Devon chose deserved to keep their jobs, and because Diana Reeves deserved a phone call from a woman with the resources to make her projections real, and because Elias Hargrove Woods deserved to grow up in a world built by someone who understood that real power is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to choose not to. Patience is not passive. It is the most active thing a person can practice, the daily decision to hold what you know, to trust the timing you have chosen, to refuse, to be rushed into a smaller version of your own response by the impatience of people who cannot imagine that you have been thinking further ahead than they can see. Ursula thought further ahead. She always had. And in the end, the woman who had been handed divorce papers in her hospital discharge clothes, who had been told in the careful language of a champagne gold dress and a manila envelope that she was a problem to be settled rather than a person to be reckoned with, that woman did not just reclaim what was hers. She built something new with it. Something with both names on the door. Something her daughter will walk into one day and understand from the quality of the light and the steadiness of the people in it that it was made with intention, made with patience, made by someone who knew exactly who she was, even during the 5 years she chose not to say so out loud. That is the inheritance Ursula Hargrove Woods is leaving her daughter. Not the $47 million, not the fund, not the East Corridor development or the South Corridor investment, or the restructured company that survived because its true owner chose survival over destruction. The inheritance is this: know who you are. Hold it carefully. And when the moment comes, and it will come, walk into the room like you have always belonged there. Because you have. Because you do. If this story reached something in you, something real, something that matters, please subscribe to this channel and share this video right now. Not just because it helps the channel grow, but because somewhere out there is a woman who needs to hear that patience is power, that silence can be a strategy, and that the name you carry is worth everything you have been through to keep it. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next story.